Congressman Scott Garrett currently represents the 5th District of New Jersey. He earned a Bachelor of Arts degree from Montclair State University in 1981 and a Juris Doctor from Rutgers School of Law in 1984. From 1990 to 2002, he served in the New Jersey General Assembly, where he served as Assistant Majority Leader. Congressman Garrett unsuccessfully ran for Congress against incumbent Congresswoman Marge Rukema in the 1998 and 2000 Republican primaries. When Congresswoman Rukema stepped down in 2002, he ran without her support as a conservative Republican and received his winning support from voters who had tired of his incumbent's moderate record. Today, Congressman Garrett serves as member of both the House Budget Committee and the House Financial Services Committee. He was recently published last Friday in the Jewish Standard for an editorial in which he discusses the implications of a nuclear Iran. He has a 100% voter rating from the National Right to Life and the American Conservative Union, and a 0% voter rating from NARAL. Please welcome Congressman Garrett.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. Morton, thank you for the opportunity. Helen, it's good to have breakfast with you. Philip, thank you for the kind introduction. I said to Philip before, as we were sitting down, make sure just make the introduction brief, and his response was, "Don't worry, it's one page in very large font." So, thank you, Philip, for hearing to that. That is a little brief history of who I am and where I came from. I like, Morton, your little content-free description of the other side. I did, as Philip says, run twice, and that's actually when I first came down to this place back in '98 to sit down in your office and chat with you when I was running against Marge at that time, and my opponent is and was a Rhino Republican, and that was what led me to run for office in the first place. I was a state legislator, a conservative member of the state assembly in New Jersey, and yes, there are a few conservatives in New Jersey, not very many of us, and yes, there are a few conservatives in the Northeast, not very many of us. Actually, I would have to sit for a moment to try to think who else is conservative in the entire Northeast. So when I'm a member of the RSC, I just digress before I give my remarks, but I'm a member of the RSC, which you all probably know is Republican Study Committee. The RSC is the Republican wing of the Republican Party here in Congress, conservative wing, and my colleagues sort of are amazed, how can it be that I vote the way I do here in Washington and still get elected back in New Jersey? When I was in the state assembly, actually, I was the highest vote getter. When I ran for 12 years in the state legislature. I'm not the highest vote getter anymore in New Jersey as a member of Congress, but I think what it does show is that you can be a conservative and still get elected in a liberal state like New Jersey. And I was just having this conversation with a member of leadership yesterday on the floor as we were sitting going through some other things. I said, "Scott, how do you do it? And do you think that any of my colleagues in New Jersey, not to disparage any of the 5 other Republicans from the state, could vote this way as well?" And I said, you can, for just the reasons that you say, that when you're content-free like that, as some of other Republicans are, it's hard to run against Democrats in a general election, because the old adage in New Jersey is, why would the voters vote for you if you're a content-free Republican when they can vote for the real thing in a Democrat? Why vote for a Democrat light when you can vote for the real Democrat? And, of course, that's just what happened in New Jersey yesterday. We just had our state legislative races. I was saying in my state that this was going to be the year, if there's ever any year in the last decade or so for New Jersey to reclaim the state Senate, this was going to be the year. And the reason was because of the taxes that John Corzine has raised, some of the other scandals that he has had in his administration, the corporate taxes, sales taxes all going up, and of course the corruption across the state of New Jersey. Bobby Jindal goes now down to be the governor of Louisiana. New Jersey is proud to be highest in taxes, highest in auto insurance, and we're also usually proud of being the most scandalous state in the country as well. And we have the most scandals in any other state. For all those reasons, we should have been able to take back the Senate. Instead, we lost 2 seats. So we're going in the wrong direction there. So it's good to be here amongst other conservatives. And what I wanted to do is to spend a little bit of time with you and speak about an issue that I'm passionate about, and that is education. And specifically, I want to talk about NCLB, No Child Left Behind, which, as you know, is one of our president's, is going to be, hopefully for his sake, he wants it to be one of his legacies. And just to address some of the concerns about it that I have, and then get to the point of what I would like to do about it, and then open it up for questions on that or anything else you may have. I told you that I come from Jersey and that I served in the state legislature. When I was there, I had the opportunity. I went from 1990 to 2002 when I went into Congress. So for those 12 years in state government, I served on various committees. And one of the committees that I served on was the Education Committee, because it's a topic, as I said, that I was concerned about. And when we were in Jersey, New Jersey did something before Washington ever realized that education was an important topic. New Jersey took part in developing, and I worked on it quite extensively, to reframe our educational system in our state. And we came up with something called CCC, and that stands for the Core Curriculum Content Standards for the state. And our idea in the state legislature was that we were going to have a basic framework of what should be taught in all the schools in our state. And it ran the gamut, or runs the gamut. It goes from, it sets goals in the areas of language arts, literacy, mathematics, science, social studies, world languages, technology literacy, visual and performing arts, comprehensive health and phys ed, career education, consumer law, consumer issues, family, and life skills as well. So it was a comprehensive program of what every school from Sussex County, where I am, down to Cape May, down the bottom of the state, all the schools would have this as their curriculum. Local schools, of course, would administer it. Testing requirements would be somewhat generalized across the state. And it was, from my perspective, something good what the state of New Jersey should be doing. We have it in our New Jersey Constitution, something called T&E, thorough and efficient education. The court said you should have a thorough and efficient education for every kid in the state, and our state legislature took it upon ourselves to say we are going to work on that and make sure that that's instilled throughout the state. So I was pleased to take part in that, and we were going to set the goals for all our schools. That's what New Jersey was doing. Then, of course, Washington comes along and interjects itself upon us. And they did that with NCLB. Now, NCLB, you hear a lot of talk about it as if it's something totally new as far as the federal government getting in the area of education with a framework of what should be done in the schools. But for those of you here who know how Washington works, this is not totally new in one sense. It really goes all the way back to 1965. NCLB is just a different permutation of EC, which is the Elementary, Secondary, and Education Act. So ESEA, way back in the 60s, was when the federal government first became involved in a significant manner on in significant methods of trying to have an influence on education. NCLB, however, was, if the president was here, would be he would probably say it as a bold new approach to dealing with ESEA. And a whole new style of handling it, and it was, because it went much further intrusion in states and localities as to how schools were going to be controlled out of Washington, D.C., as opposed by their state capitals or the local governments. For the first time, Washington was going to be stepping in and saying, we're going to impose, to some extent, standards across the country. And for the first time, the federal government has said that we are going to require from Washington more accountability from the states. Now, I should digress and just say the rationale, if there was somebody here giving the counterpoint to this talk, they would say the rationale for that was the fact that this is, to quote Don Young from Alaska, this is my money. Washington, they would say, this is federal dollars that is coming to the states, and so therefore, the argument goes, since we're sending federal dollars to the states, then they're going to require some accountability. I don't have to tell this audience that it's not Washington's money; it's the people's money, it's the states' money. It's just that we have happened to have the opportunity to tax all the states and pull it all down here and send it back to you. But that was the rationale, and that is the rationale for NCLB. And the theory goes, under what the president's thinking in this, is if you set these higher standards on the schools across the state, it would trickle down from the good schools that are in the states. It would trickle down from the good schools that are doing well already, down all the way along the line to the underperforming schools as well. So there was, I mean, give credit where credit's due. There's some theory to it, but in reality, we know it has not worked and it shall not work. The reason it has not worked is in a couple different areas. Primarily is because it puts a whole new set of burdens on your local schools that was not there before. First burden that comes to mind, and you hear about this from teachers and school administrators all the time, and parents as well, who gets into this issue, something called teaching to the test. All right? And so if your success is going to be gauged for your particular school, and you're the administrator or the teachers of that school by how well you do on the test, then of course what's going to occur is you are going to focus not so much on what the kids are learning and the quality of the education in that school. You're going to be concerning yourself with how well are my kids doing on the test. And so that's why you see all the shift now to just simply teaching to the test. And that's why also occasionally throughout the years you'll read about various scandals when the teachers in schools give information to the kids, totally change their program and focuses to just what's on the test. So that's one of the major problems with it. The other one is, and this is very important, is something called race to the bottom. A race to the bottom. Remember how this system was intended to work. It's all about accountability. Your school will only get your federal dollars back if you meet the standards. President Bush was up here. He said, yeah, but don't worry, the standards are not going to be our standards here in Washington. Your state gets to set the standards. Your state, under NCLB, gets to set the bar. And if you meet the bar, then you'll get your money. Now, it doesn't take too long to realize that if you set the bar real high, then there's a real good chance that you're not going to get the money. Now, to the credit of New Jersey, once in a while we do things right, so as my dad always said, give credit where credit is due. We set a high bar, and we have not lowered that bar in New Jersey. So New Jersey is still doing the right thing. Other states were not as, let's say, as honorable as New Jersey. They were smart, but they were smarter than New Jersey. They said, we're going to set the bar down here, and I don't know who I'm talking to in this room as far as what states you're from, so I better be careful if I pick on any states that don't have such a great reputation. But anyway, I won't. You know, they set the bar down here, and they said, hey, look at that. All of our kids are passing the tests. We're doing great under this system, and so we continue to get the money. So that's what we call a race to the bottom. The states went out there and lowered the bar. And it's not just on, when it comes to this issue, it's not just on the basics. Remember, I told you about New Jersey had a whole list of subjects that we talked about, literacy and phys ed and from sciences and like. Remember, NCLB says all those things are not as important as your reading and writing. So it's only those couple areas. But because of the race to the bottom in those areas, there's other areas that NCLB looks to as well. Are you a violent school, for example? And if you're a violent school, then there's certain issues that have to be dealt with as well. There's a lot of crime in your school and that sort of thing. Well, you might be pleased to know that we don't have any violent schools in this country anymore because of NCLB. Now, that's not because kids aren't being beat up in the schools and the kids aren't bringing guns to school and there's not drugs in the school. But that's because if you redefine what violence is in the school, then you can say that we no longer have violence in the schools. So NCLB got rid of all the violence in the school. So those are the couple problems with it. Teach to the test, race to the bottom when it comes to what is being taught in school. The other, of course, is the obvious problem of any federal program, and that is the paperwork that goes with it. I mean, teachers, any of you that have kids or grandkids, you go to school, talk to your teachers. Teachers will already tell you that their job is already burdensome enough, the fact that they're dealing with your kids. But add on to that the fact that they have all the paperwork on top of that, it makes it even more difficult. Some of the numbers on this. According to the GAO, the Government Accountability Office, 41% of the financial support and staffing at state agencies was needed to satisfy federal regulations. What does that mean? In other words, the federal government was the cause of 41% of the administrative burden at the state level. So all the regulations and everything is causing them to spend so much of their money, so 41% of it. And then on the other side of the equation, they would say, well, how much money does the state get from the Washington? On average, New Jersey's a little lower than this, on average, it's only 7%. So I know I'm throwing up numbers to you without a chart, but basically that means is for every dollar that your school is spending in the state, 7 cents of that comes from Washington. But the 41% of the administrative cost to do all the deal with the red tape and the paperwork is due to what Washington imposes upon them. Altogether, if you add up those numbers, NCLB will cost $1.9 billion between 2002 and 2008 just to deal with the paperwork. You put that into man hours, and it comes out to be about 6.68 million man hours just to deal with the paperwork. No education is occurring at all during that. This is just dealing with the paperwork. I think I have some charts. I'll digress at this point from NCLB just to an issue of spending money. While he does that, don't disregard the man behind the curtain. When you talk to anyone in education, as far as school administrators, school board people, or teachers, they will tell you this whole issue of education really centers around the issue of money, and that the way to improve education is how? Spend more money on it. So part of my look into NCLB is the whole issue of whether this is true or not. And if you can see where you're standing, or where you're sitting, and where I'm standing, let's see which charts we have. There we go. Thank you. I can see. I don't know whether you can see in the back, but if you can't, I'll just tell you what it looks like. There's a good-looking picture of me right over here, and you can't say that, depending on how bad your eyesight is. This chart is labeled the Federal Education Spending and Reading Score. So we're just looking at reading right now on this. The bottom of the chart starts on the left-hand side on the x-axis, 1970, goes up to 2005, I guess in 5-year increments. And on the right-hand, on the y-axis, is dollars that we spend on education. So it starts out at $0, it goes up to $80 billion, and that's in 2005 dollars in constant dollars. And then what we're looking at is reading scores. The green line, the yellowy orange line, and the red line are the scores. Okay, the red one down the bottom is the 9-year-old scores. The middle one, the orange line, is 13-year-olds, and the top green line is 17-year-old scores on the National Educational Assessment tests for reading. Now the black line, if you can see, is federal spending. It's starting in 1970. It starts there, it dips down a little bit in I guess that in the Reagan years, and then it goes back up in 2005. So basically it's overall an upward tilt on federal spending. You would think, with all the talk about all we need is just a few more bucks in our schools, that the black line would have some degree of correlation with the other lines. But what you see instead is, ever since, remember the year, here's a test, when did I say education became involved with the federal level? Very good, 1965. If you would think 1970 is just a beginning when it actually took effect, that there would be some sort of correlation of, now that the federal government is involved with education, that you would see some sort of improvement, or that there be a correlation to the federal dollars, but you don't. From 1970 to 2005, on all 3 levels of kids, 9-year-olds, 13-year-olds, and 17-year-olds, their scores are basically been flat. No improvement whatsoever. But look at the spending level, and you'll see it continues to go up. We have one other chart, or 2 more charts? We have lots more charts. This is what we spend your federal tax dollars on. Charts. These are fun. The charts all make the same point, but we like to do it with different charts. This is percentage change from the baseline. Again, this is starting from 1980 up to 2004. Now we're looking at math scores. Last one was reading scores. And you have, well, the one line you can probably see from all the way in the back is the red line. That is your funding line. So starts low and then goes straight up an arrow angle all the way up to the right. And the bottom scores, bottom lines are blue and green. and the light green looking again at different age of kids. And what do we see about the improvement on math scores since the federal government has been involved in education? Flat across the board. What do we see about educational dollars? Continuous rise. We'll just show the other two as well. One of these charts, by the way, are come courtesy of a couple of folks, both the Heritage Foundation and also, if you're interested in education issues, Neil McCluskey wrote a book that I've read. It's really good, and we got some of these charts from it. Neil shared it with us. It's called Feds in the Classroom, How Big Government Corrupts, Cripples, and Compromises American Education. And his work was influential in some of the work that we were doing in this office on educational issues. And now we do the same thing here. The next two charts, and these will be the end of my charts, are on what we call non-instructional spending, and the next chart will be instructional spending. Non-instructional spending, is when it comes to education, is, let's do it the other way. Instructional spending on education is what you would think of education. Money going into the classroom. The books, maybe the pencils, if they still give out pencils, and the teacher's salary. That would be instructional. Okay. The non-instructional, which is the next chart, this chart right here, is everything else. So the administrators, the building, the transporting the kids on the buses, if you have buses where you are, that would be the non-instructional. So we see the same correlations on these charts. This is a neat little chart the way they do it. The blue dots are 8th grade kids, and the red dots are the 4th grade kids. So this is non-instructional. This is the transport and other things. Again, we're looking at the money from $3,000 up to $6,500. This is how much we're spending per kid in the schools. The charts on the y-axis, the left axis over here, is the NAEP scores again, going from 400 and 580. Again, if the idea is if only Washington would just spend a little more money, we would start seeing some improvement in these areas. Well, the charts show that ain't the case. The dots just show that it's, again, just constantly across the board, no significant improvement. So in other words, on the 4th graders on the red, you have some schools that are spending around $3,200 per student, and he's getting around a 460 on the score. And then you have another school on the other end of the spectrum that's also getting around 460, and they're spending $6,500. So there's no correlation. And I'll just do the last one. And the last one just makes the point with instructional spending, the money going into the classroom itself. Exact same. It gets bunched up a little bit more, but I think that's just where averages and statistics works out. But again, same numbers, $2,500 up to $7,500. Again, you have some school out there paying $3,000, getting around $460. You have another school spending almost $7,500, and that school's getting the same thing. So I appreciate that. I say all that with the understanding that, look, there are factors that impact upon whether a school is going to do well or not. There are factors that are going to impact on whether your school is going to be educating well or not. And you can sort of think what those factors might be. Funding might be one, but we just sort of discredited that idea. Other ones might be, and I'm not going to go into the legitimacy of these, but classroom size, teacher certifications, textbooks and what they have there, methodologies that they're doing in the classroom, other demographic issues as far as what's going on in the community and what have you. But the difference between that and this is that those are all truly local issues. You know, how the teacher is teaching in that classroom is truly a local thing that you can only analyze by looking at that particular classroom. Issues about how the instructional method is, what they're doing, what have you, are local. Issues that the federal government is just so far removed from that you cannot have a national system to try to implement and regulate that. I'll do one other side just to show you some numbers. I'm from the great state of New Jersey. I look at those numbers. Those numbers are average for the country, and I just sort of laugh at them. I should be sad, I guess, because in New Jersey we're up to around $20,000 spending per pupil. Any other states around here? Any come close to $20,000? And of course, our numbers are not significantly better than anywhere else in the country. We do, if you listen to, I'll do another aside. We do, however, if you read the billboards in New Jersey, down in Trenton and Newark, have a very high pass rate in New Jersey, and graduation rate, I should say. And I just found out why that is. The reason we have such a great graduation rate is New Jersey, there's two ways to graduate from high school. One is the old-fashioned way. go through 12 years of school, pass all your tests, take your graduation tests, and you get your diploma. There's another way. You do that, or you get social promotion all the way up through grade 12. And then if you don't pass that test, then you can take that test a second time, the graduation test. And if you don't pass it then, you can take it a third time. And if you don't take it then there's an alternative test that you can take, specially designed for those students who obviously have a difficulty taking those standardized tests. And amazingly, the kids who take that test almost 100% of the time pass it the first time. We don't know why that is, except that we want to have a high graduation rate in the state of New Jersey. But the NJEA is very proud of the fact that we have such a high graduation rate. Back on target. On the issue of NCLB, so we see some of the problems with NCLB, the fact that it is not locally oriented towards the issues that really are controlling in the classroom, as opposed to being down here in Washington. It's a race to the bottom. It's a issue that is directing the issue to focusing on the test and not anything else. It's also a system that puts undue burdens on the schools to deal with No Child Left Behind and can create problems of redirecting focus. And I'll just close on explaining what that means is this. We have a school in our state, actually it's up in my district, that was in fact one of the best performing schools in the state of New Jersey. Legitimately so. I mean, it's in an affluent area. All the kids that graduate from it legitimately go on to college. The SAT scores on average are well over 1,100, so we have a great SAT score as that goes. We have a number of AEP programs, accelerated programs for the kids as well. So it was one of the best performing schools in the state of New Jersey. However, No Child Left Behind comes along and says, because of the accountability requirements in NCLB, it was a failing school. It didn't meet one of the parameters of it. And there's real technical reasons why that occurred, but that did occur. What happens now to that school? Here you have a great school, a great administration, great board and everything else doing all the right things. They are now have been distracted from their regular program to say, we're not going to get our money next year or the year after that under NCLB. We're going to have to now focus our attention on to comply with the red tape of NCLB. So they are now been distracted from what they should be doing. And so who benefits from that? No one. Who loses from that? The kids in the next couple of years, while the administrators now try to deal with getting their school unlisted from the risk list and putting back onto the regular list as a performing school. An element of that also is that the people in the schools really don't then have any control anymore and influence with the local administrators on what should be going on in their schools. If the administrators realize we're not going to get our federal dollars, we got to stop listening to the parents in the school and the community. We got to listen to Washington. There's a detachment there. I have in my district, and I do in my district, town hall meetings. And so I do occasionally ones on NCLB. And when I do that, I'll ask this question to the audience. I'll say, how many people here have had a concern in your school with something going on in your school? Just about everybody in the audience, since it's on an educational site. Sometime or other, they'll have had a concern. Okay. How many people, when you had a concern like that, brought your concern to the school, to your teacher, to your principal, or something like that? Almost everybody will raise their hand. Fine, that's good. How many people brought it to the county superintendent, which we have in Jersey? A few people. How many people brought it to Trenton, the state capital? Maybe one of the most initiated in the audience will raise their hand at that. And finally, I'd say, well, you had a concern with your school. How many people brought your concern to Washington? And of course, the answer is no one. And there is the dilemma. People are not going to want to travel down to Washington, D.C. when they have a problem with their school or a problem with NCLB to talk to their congressman, if they know who their congressman is. And they certainly are not going to want to have to go down to meet with someone from the U.S. Department of Education to deal with a problem in their school. They want to be able to deal with their local principal, their teacher, to resolve it. NCLB gets in the way of that. So let me close then with what my solution is to this. And then I'll open up to questions. My solution would be to allow a return to the way it was pre-1965, if you will. We can do this while NCLB continues to get discussed and reauthorized. I didn't mention this, but we're in the phase right now, hopefully you know, for the reauthorization of NCLB. 5-year program. It's up for reauthorization right now, and it will be, I think, reauthorized sometime during this 110th Congress. My pitch, if you will, to the chairman of the committee is do whatever you want with NCLB when you reauthorize it. Tweak it around the edges, put in less accountability or more accountability. The Democrats will say we need more money, put in more money, whatever you want to do. They're going to do it anyway. Go ahead and fix NCLB as you see fit. But I asked for this modest compromise. Somewhere in that piece of legislation, allow for the opportunity of a state, if it wants to opt out of NCLB and ESEA entirely. Just to opt out of it. Now you might say, well, you can do that right now. If a state wanted to, and Utah, you may know, wanted to, a few years ago, opt out of NCLB, and so not have all the regulations on it. You can do that now, but there's a caveat. If you opt out now, you don't get any of your money back. So Utah, if they opted out, would still be sending all their money for educational dollars to Washington, and they would go to my state and your state and what have you, but Utah would have no of this red tape, but they wouldn't get any money. And that, of course, is unfair, and no state legislator from either party is going to say, I want to turn back that check from Washington. So my proposal would say, allow a state to opt out, but let the state keep the money. And even better than let the state keep the money, how about this as a novel idea? Let the taxpayer in that state keep the money. And the way the taxpayer would keep the money is through a tax credit. Now, I will just digress for a moment that and tell you that there is an alternative idea on the table right now. Pete Hoekstra has a bill in, and I'm a co-sponsor of his bill, and he's a co-sponsor of my bill, that also allows for an opt-out and the state keeping the money. But that his bill, as I say, it's a good bill. I'd be happy if we could even get that far. His bill, the A+ bill, would allow for those dollars to come back to the state in the form of a block grant. And for those of you who have been around for a while, you may know this idea was proposed back when Republicans controlled in 97, 98, or 99 somewhere, and they didn't get it passed. And it's a good idea except with one caveat. In my research on block grants, most block grants work out fine initially in theory. You set up a nice clean block grant that goes back to the state with no strings attached, and it's clean until the next administration or the next Congress or the next crisis occurs, and then someone in Washington says, okay, here's your block grant, but here's a caveat. Here's a string here, here's a string here, here's a string there, and sooner or later, the block grant is no longer a block grant. It's just the same formula you had before with all the strings attached. So it's a great idea to start with, but it always goes down the wrong road. The tax credit idea is a cleaner system because the money, there's no chance really then anymore for the strings to be attached. And instead of having the money go back to the state, which a block grant does, a block grant for New Jersey would go back to the bureaucrats in Trenton, the state capital, to dispense or spend. This money on a tax credit would go back to you, the taxpayer. And if you were, after you did it for a couple of years and you adjusted your W-2 as far as your deductions and what have you, in essence, you would not be sending any money to Washington anymore when it comes to educational dollars. You would just, education would be outside of the realm of what your state deals with in Washington. I see this, if we were able to do this in education, allow for an opt-out, optional, voluntary. Maybe only one state would do it initially. Maybe it would be Utah. New Jersey never would. We're too liberal. But because we know, New Jersey knows that, and I've spoken to CSL, Council of State Legislators, and I made this pitch. And I said, if you're responsible state government, you don't need us to tell you how to spend your dollars, right? But there were some people in the room. Remember, these are state legislators elected by their citizens to represent them in their state capital. But some of them said, yeah, but, you know, we need, basically they said, we need Washington to tell us what to do. So some states will do that. New Jersey obviously believes that they need Washington to tell them what to do. That's fine, so they'll do that. But if Utah wants to opt out, or other states would, they could. And I see this, if we are able to do this, as a very neat template, if you will, for future programs. I have another bill in back when we were doing transportation that would set up a similar program. It's called the State Act for federal gasoline taxes. As a matter of fact, I just got the endorsement from the transportation secretary to my idea at a hearing the other day that does the same thing on your gasoline taxes. The idea is, why do we send you collect gasoline taxes in your state, you send them down to Washington, and you get them back again. But this would be a neat template for any program. The COPS program. Is there any idea why you send money to Washington for us to decide to how it's going to be spent and send it back to your state when it comes to law enforcement? Isn't your state smart enough to figure out how local law enforcement should be done? Well, apparently most states can't. That's why we're here in Washington to fix it for you. But if we could get this template done for education dollars, you could set up the exact same thing for the COPS program. If your state wants to opt out of COPS, fine. Then you would opt out of it. You would get a refundable credit, or a tax credit back to your state. It would stay in your pocket, and then it would be up to you in your state how you're going to do law enforcement. You name the program, you could just put it into this particular template, and your state would once again be in charge. For the other states that realize that they need the benefit of Washington's intelligence and what have you, you could stay in the program, stay with Washington, and we'll gladly distribute your dollars as we see fit with our preconditions and regulations. So that's our proposal. I'll close on saying where it is right now. Initially, at the beginning of the year, you may have seen in the paper that the president sat down with Ted Kennedy, and because the two of them were the ones who gave us NCLB in the first place, and Kennedy said that they were going to have it done by March of this year, and Miller was going to be on board in the House to get it done soon thereafter. Now we're in November, and now they're having problems with it in the House, and we're not sure exactly when it will get done. We're almost done for this first year of the 110th Congress. Next year is an election year, of course, and so things may slow down because of that. Somewhere along the line, though, NCLB has to be reauthorized. Mine is just a modest proposal. The name of the program, or the bill number, by the way, if you want to jot this down, is 3177. I think there's packets actually on your table. We call it the LEARN Act. It's called Local Education Authority Returns Now. Local Education Authority Returns Now, because that's the whole idea. Return the authority back to the state's teachers, parents, to control schools in your neighborhood. I appreciate your kind attention. And if there's any questions on this or anything else that we're dealing with down the street in Washington, glad to answer it. Thank you.
I know of one private college that accepts no federal funds of any sort. Do you know of any public or private high schools that follow this? Well,
clearly, I know private high schools and private schools don't get, generally speaking, federal dollars, so private would not be involved. Public high schools, no. I know of absolutely no public schools, because most public schools come under the state system, and there is no state government right now that says we are rejecting the federal dollars. Absolutely not. Okay.
The viewer wants to know, what are your thoughts about school voucher programs? Getting the federal government out of education is ideal, but if that is not doable immediately, is there any action which is moving towards a solution based on school vouchers?
Sure. Yeah, matter of fact, I was at another group, and Star Parker raised that question, says you should be focusing on vouchers. And my answer to that is I'm all in favor of vouchers. When I was in state government, I tried to push for vouchers in our state. The best we could come even close to vouchers was charter schools. It's a distance from vouchers, but that's our first step we could do in New Jersey. I'm entirely in favor of vouchers, but understand this. Even with vouchers, we should not, as Republicans, as conservatives, we should not be talking on a national level about vouchers. You can talk about it back in your state. Your state should have vouchers, but the federal government should not be talking about vouchers, because in order for us to have a federal voucher, it means that your state has to send the money to Washington. We have to set up the program, how the voucher is going to work, and then we're going to send it back to your state. Can't we cut Washington out of that picture? We should not be. We can advocate for vouchers in general, but the federal government should not be running a voucher program. It should be your state program. I'll let Morton pick the. Thank you.
Congressman, I say you're very refreshing this morning to my ears. In 2009, there's a strong possibility that the dynamics will not change in terms of party control. Perhaps the White House may go the other way. I see today a serious problem in mass immigration, whether legal or illegal. Okay. And in 20 years, I believe this could easily break the country. Do you think in 2009, if things stay basically the same, that the conservatives in Congress will be able to stop a Kennedy, McCain, Bush type of concept of open borders, millions of people coming in, whether legally or illegally? Will you be able to hold the line in 2009 and 10 if things stay the same?
Well, if things stay, well, it's hard to say with that caveat of things stay the same. I'll put it this way. I am optimistic still. Despite what happened in Virginia just yesterday, I'm optimistic still nationally for the Republican Party and conservatives in the House at least. I mean, we know going into 2008, we are not going to take the Senate back. That just the numbers are not there. In the White House, I can't predict what's going to happen in the White House. But I can talk about the House. Right now, you should feel good about this. Despite all the problems that the Republican Party has had over the last several years and that we've gone in the wrong direction on a number of issues, the 110th Congress, the GOP conference that we have right now, is probably one of the most conservative conferences, GOP conferences, that we have had in years. Yes, we're in the minority, and yes, we lost a lot of good people last time, but the number of conservatives that we have in the House right now is more than we've ever had before. That's a good thing. If we go into the 108th election, if we're able to pick up the 16 seats or so we need to take back the majority, and if you guys out there talk to your friends and support them to make sure that they are conservative, the 111th GOP House conference will then again be the most conservative conference that we have had in years. And yes, if Hillary's in the White House and Harry Reid is still in the Senate, you will have a House of Representatives that will, at the very least, be able to block her initiatives of amnesty and open borders and the like. So my focus is to be optimistic about taking back the House and taking it back with a conservative majority that will begin to set the agenda. It's hard. I'll be honest with you. It's hard then to move that agenda, that conservative agenda, when you're looking to Harry Reid to make the compromises with. But I'll give you this little tidbit too. I just had a conversation on the floor last night with members of leadership, and I think our leadership now is realizing that you don't have to move things for the sake of moving, which we did in the past, and that's what led us to our problems. You just move legislation because we're in the business of moving legislation, and if we're not moving the bad legislation anymore, that'll be an improvement for this country, I believe, certainly on that issue. Morton.
Thank you. I'm from Jersey City, and I'm from Rutgers alumni. Congressman, it was very stimulating and inspiring, really, actually. But I would like to learn the percentage, the proportion of budget that is distributed to minorities in the United States, for minority students, right, for poor and minority families. Because as the National Press Club, I was at the club, and they had a new press release, that family is the smallest school in America, that we need more to do to help with financial resources for these poor and minority families. Because I'm very much concerned, can this present generation in America produce mighty spirits, very genius mind children, kids, like these spirits had reputation in the past? Thank you very much.
Sure.
I appreciate it.
I can't give you statistics off the top of my head. I'll just I'll give you the cards of my staff, and they'll give you all the statistics. No, I put the burden on my staff instead. I can say this in general. When it comes to the federal government, when it comes to the issues that you raise with regard to education, again, my answer would be the same, that it's not the responsibility or the role of the federal government to be involved in those areas, that those areas are best left to the states and the local communities. For the very reasons that I discussed so far, would also maybe be amplified in the minority community as well, that their dilemmas, their difficulties, the problems, the challenges that they have are unique to them in certain ways, and that it's best to be addressed on a local perspective in the local community to try and solve them. So the federal government, when it comes to the educational dollars, which is where you're going, part of your question, should be left on that perspective. And secondly, on the overall aspect of trying to deal with just a minority issue, I just give you an example. We just came out of committee markup yesterday, financial services, on the issue of housing. Sometimes legislation comes through Congress with great names to it, might have a minority-sounding name to it or something like that, and you're thinking, well, we're voting yes on this, and this is going to be doing something for the minority. In reality, when you get into the weeds on it, you realize just the opposite. For example, we did a piece of legislation that's dealing with the subprime market, and I know this is off education, but obviously front-page stories of the subprime market and the issue of housing. Well, currently, minority population, as you know, is doing better when it comes to getting their first house than ever before, but they're still less than the average American. Well, we passed legislation to try to address subprime market. I put in a piece of an amendment to the bill to make sure that what we do will not do anything to hurt the minority population. Minority populations, on average, have less income, less abilities to buy a house, and what have you. And the bill and my amendment was struck down because the Democrat majority rather is push legislation that in the end is probably going to be disastrous to the subprime market and to the housing market. So I think you have to look at each individual topical area, whether it's education, where we do not have a role, where it's in dealing with financial sectors, where we're dealing with yesterday, where we do have a role and we can take actions, and the actions that we can take can have an advantage, both an advantageous or disadvantageous issue for the minority population. I think the Republican Party has been the one that's been working to try to improve it, and the Democrats speak more in sound bites on it. Thanks.
You spoke about the ideal being no federal funding, and
Federal government out of it. Yeah.
That was how it was before 1965. And then you mentioned the compromise, the compromise, and
sure.
My question, and then you also said that New Jersey is most likely not going to adopt your compromise. And my question is, well, I've always been an idealist, so I see the value in no federal funding, and I don't see any reason to apologize to people who are so dependent on the federal government, for wanting to go back to the country's foundations.
Sure.
So, I'm just wondering what your motivation. I mean, how can you be so motivated for this compromise when you don't even think your state's going to accept it?
Well, okay, yeah. Well, because one, it's the right thing to do, and I guess I'm an idealist like you are in these regards. That so much of what we try to do, is probably not going to occur. And hopefully this one will, but you do it because it's the right thing to do. But also in the long term, I think that as I said before, in a couple ways. One, this can become a template for other programs. And B, even on the education area, I don't believe that New Jersey would be one, if this was to pass in the 110th Congress, I do not believe that New Jersey would be one to jump on the bandwagon. But if in 2010 Utah picked up on it, in 2011 2 or 3 other states said, hey, we can do it, in 2012 3 other states said, we can do it, you may begin to see the situation where it's having a ripple effect across the board, and eventually states like New Jersey will step up and say, yes, you know what, our state legislators are smart enough to run our own educational system just like 30 other states are able to do it, and eventually it may come back to New Jersey, and we'll get to it there as well. I'm just saying that it'll take a little bit of time for our state. Yeah, but thanks for the question. 2 more questions.
Has the NEA taken a position on your bill?
Well, they were very nice when they came and met with me in the office, but they have not taken an official position, right? No official position on the bill. I believe that when I talk to I'll say this: when I talk to individual teachers about it, they like the idea. When you talk to individual teachers, they are very, very upset with No Child Left Behind. They don't like the paperwork. They don't like the regulation. They want to be in charge. I mean, look, the average teacher, 99.9% of teachers are good teachers. The average teacher wants to be able to teach, maybe 90%. I see somebody shaking their head. A lot of teachers, how about that? A lot of teachers are good teachers. How about that? A lot of teachers are good teachers. The teachers that my kids had were good teachers. And they really just want to do right by their kids in their class, and they don't like all the rigmarole. So when you talk to that level, they like the idea. When you get up into the organization and the unions and what have you, they may have a slightly different agenda. And one more.
Congressmember, what has always, for decades of my life, perplexed me.
And I'm going to answer it right now.
I hope so. Is why
I should charge for this, I think, then.
Is why when the federal contribution to local education
Yeah.
is so minimal
Yeah.
that no state and no school district has simply turned back this pittance of money and all the regulatory burden that goes with it, in that the costs imposed on schools by the federal requirements may well be greater than the federal contribution. It even surprises me that there hasn't been a real study making this case.
Yeah.
And could you enlighten me, perhaps, as to why this seemingly obvious solution hasn't been tried anywhere?
Because it's hard for a state legislator to stand up and say, I'm going to vote to turn down, fill in the blank, $800 million, I think, which is the ballpark number for the state of New Jersey in federal aid. Now it sounds like a lot, but we spend, I forget the number, $13 billion or something like that in education in our state, or more than that. So it's hard for a legislator to say, I'm going to turn down $800 million in state aid, because that's a clean, clear number that you're voting against. The other number, the red tape number, you can do a study on it, and you can find out that it actually costs, I'll make up a number, $1.2 billion to implement, but it also means that you have to pass a bill that says we're no longer going to do all this red tape, and we're going to discharge all of these federal/state employees that are part of our cost in implementing the program. So that's pretty hard for state legislators to do, and that's why I get the reaction when I speak to organizations of state legislators, because they know that they have the power to do it right now, as you suggest, but they just don't take it. Thank you.
Wow, what a terrific presentation. This is a this is an example of a guy who is obviously hardworking, obviously smart, obviously articulate, and yet we don't see him promoted in the national media. I wonder why. Yeah, and the fact that he is principled obviously hurts him as well. But I thank you so much for your excellent presentation, very informative. And as a little token of appreciation, I'd like to present to you one of the Leadership Institute's Adam Smith ties. Good deal. Ladies and gentlemen, I invite you all to join us next month, Wednesday, December 5th, for our next Wednesday Wake Up Club breakfast, when our featured speaker will be Bob McDonnell, Attorney General